It is sometime late. The city outside has gone quiet. The only thing still moving is the mind, the one that waits until the body stops before it speaks. You have been here before. The dark room. The thoughts that arrive with the particular clarity that evening permits. Tonight, those thoughts have a companion. His name was Erich Fromm, and he spent 50 years trying to answer the question you are probably carrying right now, even if you would not put it in words exactly this way. Have I been doing it right? He was born in Frankfurt, Germany, in 1900, the son of a wine merchant, an only child. He was bookish and serious, and by his own account, lonely in the particular way that intelligent children often are. He read the Talmud under Rabbi Nehemiah Nobel, a man who had the rare gift of making ancient questions feel personal. Later, he would study under Rabbi Salman Baruch Rabinkow in Heidelberg. And through those years of Talmudic study, the careful attention to what a text means, the willingness to sit with a question for years before settling for an answer, he learned the discipline that would carry him through everything that followed. In 1934, Fromm packed a single case in Frankfurt, Germany, and walked out of the country he had been born into. The Third Reich had made a choice he could not accept. He traveled first to Geneva, then to New York, arriving in a country that was not his, among people who did not yet know his name. He was 34 years old. He had lost almost everything a man can lose without losing his life, his homeland, his language's daily music, the intellectual circles he had inhabited since his 20s. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. There is nowhere you need to go tonight. He arrived in New York with a question that had been forming since his years in Frankfurt. Not a philosophical abstraction, but a practical problem, the kind that keeps a person awake. Why, he wanted to know, do people who are capable of love so consistently fail at it? Not through cruelty, not through indifference, through something more puzzling, through genuine effort that points in the wrong direction. In that rented room in Manhattan, in a new country, with a blank page in front of him, he began the work that would eventually become The Art of Loving. Not yet the book, the question. There is a kind of loneliness that no amount of company cures, that arrives. Fromm would say, precisely when your life is fullest, we will name it before the night ends. Let your breath move on its own. You do not need to change it. The lamp is on. We have time. Fromm's thesis, when it finally arrived in book form in 1956, was simple enough to state in a single sentence and difficult enough to spend a lifetime practicing. Love is an art, not a feeling that lands without warning, not a luck that some people have and others do not, not a chemistry equation that either works or does not. An art. The same word we use for music, for painting, for the craft of writing well. And an art, Fromm said, requires two things that most people never apply to love at all: knowledge and effort. Most people, he observed, approach love the way they approach a lottery. They buy the ticket, they present themselves attractively, They put themselves in the right situations, they wait, and then they hope. The problem is not that they want love. The problem is that they want to be loved rather than to love. They want the result without the practice. His study in Manhattan. The books stacked at the corners of a borrowed desk. A man in his mid-30s, displaced from everything familiar, turning his own displacement into a lesson about what it means to need and what it means to choose. Tonight we begin there. Chapter 2, The Question He Could Not Outrun. There is a particular kind of question that a person carries from childhood into old age without ever quite setting it down. Fromm's was this: what does it mean to be fully human, not morally accomplished, not financially successful, fully human in the sense that a tree is fully a tree when it grows into all its potential and not into some cramped version of itself dictated by the container it happened to land in. He found the beginning of an answer in an unusual place. The Hebrew prophets, Isaiah, Amos, Hosea. These were writers who had a very specific idea about what it meant to be alive, that existence was not something you passively received, but something you actively chose every day through your relationships with other people. The prophets did not talk about the afterlife very much. They talked about justice. They talked about how you treat the stranger, the widow, the poor. They talked about love as a practice in the world, not a sentiment in the chest. Fromm carried that with him into his training in psychoanalysis under Frieda Reichmann in the 1920s in Frankfurt. He read Freud with the same careful attention he had brought to the Talmud, looking for what the text illuminated, willing to argue with what it missed. Freud's great contribution, Fromm would say later, was the discovery that the unconscious exists and shapes behavior. Freud's great limitation was that he reduced everything to biology, to drives, to instincts, to the hydraulics of the body. He left out society. He left out history. He left out the way the world outside a person shapes the world inside them. Feel the weight of your head where it rests. Let your jaw soften. Fromm's innovation was to ask, what if the unconscious is not just biological? What if it is also social? What if the repressions and anxieties that drive a person's behavior were installed not only by childhood conflicts, but by the particular requirements of the society they were born into? A capitalist society needs certain kinds of people who are acquisitive, who compete, who measure themselves in terms of what they have rather than what they are. What if the society arranges, unconsciously and without malice, to produce exactly those people? This was the question he brought with him to New York in 1934. And it was connected, he would discover, to the question of love, because the same social arrangements that produced the marketing character, the automaton conformist, the person who had become entirely what the market needed them to be, also produced the person who had no idea how to love. They had been trained to consume, not to cultivate, to acquire, not to tend. Baruch Spinoza, that other exile, grinding lenses in The Hague 2 centuries earlier, had written in the Ethics that an emotion ceases to be a source of suffering the moment we form a clear picture of it, not when we fix it. when we understand it. Fromm took that as his method. His first step was always the same: name the thing clearly, not to cure it immediately, to know it. He named things with great care. He named the 3 escape routes from freedom. He named the 4 elements of love. He named the difference between mother love and father love, between symbiosis and genuine union, between the narcissist and the person capable of self-love. He named the loneliness of plenty. He named all of it. Tonight we follow his naming. Chapter 3. The Art That Is Not a Feeling. If love was simply a feeling, Fromm said, there would be nothing to teach. You would either have it or you would not. The piano would play itself. But love is not a feeling. Or rather, love is not only a feeling. It has a feeling component, certainly, the warmth, the pull, the particular quality of attention that another person can call out of you. But feelings, as Fromm observed, come and go. They arrive without invitation and leave the same way. A feeling cannot be the foundation of a life because a feeling cannot be practiced. An art can be practiced. He gave the analogy of music. A child who wants to play the piano does not sit at the keyboard and wait for inspiration to arrive. They learn scales. They practice the same passage 50 times until the fingers know the movement without consulting the brain. They make mistakes, many mistakes, embarrassing ones, the mistakes that happen when you are learning something difficult with your whole body and not just your mind. Over years, the scales become phrases, the phrases become music, and eventually something happens that looks to an outside observer like effortless spontaneity, but is actually the result of accumulated practice. The music comes from somewhere below the level of conscious effort, from the place where the thing has been truly learned. Love is the same, Fromm said. It requires knowledge, understanding what love actually is, not what the films and the songs and the greeting cards say it is. And it requires effort, the daily, non-glamorous, often invisible work of attending to another person with care and respect and genuine curiosity about who they are. He was not talking about romantic love exclusively. He was talking about love as a capacity, a human faculty that, like music, can be developed or left undeveloped, practiced or neglected. And like music, it cannot be faked for long. The person who has not practiced cannot produce the sound however much they want to. Let your body settle into where it rests. Your breath is doing its work. You can let go of directing it. Fromm observed that most people in the modern world treat love as a problem of the object rather than a problem of the subject. That is, they believe the difficulty is in finding the right person, not in becoming the right practitioner. They spend their energy on the search, on presenting themselves attractively, on evaluating potential partners, on the mechanics of meeting and impressing, and very little energy on the question of whether they themselves know how to love. William James, the American psychologist who pulled himself out of a paralyzing despair in 1870 by deciding to believe in free will, wrote in The Principles of Psychology that the stream of consciousness is not a chain of disconnected states, but a continuous flow, each thought already shaping the next. Fromm extended that insight to love. The quality of your love life is not determined by the quality of the people you meet. It is determined by the quality of the loving faculty you bring to every meeting. There are two kinds of tiredness, and you may be carrying the second. Not the tiredness of the body which sleep cures, but the tiredness of someone who has been trying very hard in the wrong direction. We will name that second tiredness before the night ends. The Art of Loving was published in 1956. It sold 3 million copies. It was translated into more than 20 languages. And Fromm, who was by then in his 50s and living in Mexico City, remained bemused by this. He had not written a self-help book. He had not written a how-to guide. He had written a diagnosis, and people recognized themselves in it with the particular relief that comes from seeing your private confusion rendered visible in print. The diagnosis was simple. Modern people believe they need to be loved. What they need to learn is to love. Chapter 4. How we were taught to fall. Here is the confusion Fromm found most durable. People mistake the experience of falling in love for love itself. Falling in love is real. It is one of the most vivid experiences available to a human being. The dissolution of the boundary between self and other. The sense that the world has reorganized itself around a single person. The heightened attention that makes even ordinary moments feel significant. The morning coffee, the way they hold a pen, the particular shape of their voice saying your name. This is real. Fromm did not deny it. But he noted something important. The experience of falling in love is by definition temporary. The boundary between self and other dissolves in the first weeks or months of a relationship because two strangers are suddenly known to each other. Each is discovering a whole interior world in the other, and the discovery is intoxicating. But discovery, by its nature, ends. The mystery becomes familiar. The interior world, once revealed, is simply the interior world you live in now. And here is where most relationships fail. Not through betrayal, not through cruelty, but through a simple misdiagnosis. The partners believed that the feeling of falling was love, and so when the falling sensation fades, as it must, as it always does, they conclude that love has left. They begin to wonder if they chose the wrong person. They feel the ordinary flatness of two people who know each other well and confuse that flatness for the absence of love when it is actually its prerequisite. And here is the quiet detail that changes it. What replaces the falling is not emptiness. It is the opportunity for the actual practice to begin. Fromm was drawing on something he had observed in his clinical work in Frankfurt and New York. The person who is most romantic, who falls most intensely, most repeatedly, who lives for the electrical charge of new connection, is often the person least capable of sustained love. Not because they feel too much, but because they have never developed the capacity for the slower, quieter, less dramatic forms of attention that love actually requires. They are excellent at the concert. They have never learned to practice scales. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the contact between your body and the surface beneath you. You do not need to hold yourself up. He traced this partly to what culture teaches. The films, the songs, the stories. All of them organized around the falling, the meeting, the obstacle, the reunion, the climax. None of them organized around what comes after. The Tuesday mornings, the conversations that need to happen again, the patient sitting with of someone's difficult moods. Culture is very good at teaching us what the beginning looks like. It is almost silent on the practice. He also traced it to a deeper anxiety. Falling in love is passive. You do not decide to fall in love. You fall. And there is a particular comfort in passivity, in the sense that something is happening to you, that you are being carried rather than having to carry. The passive experience of love requires nothing of you except to be present for the feeling. The active practice requires something much more demanding, the decision made every day in the absence of the initial electricity to see the other person clearly and to respond to who they are. Michel de Montaigne, who retreated to a round tower room in Bordeaux in 1571 after losing everyone he loved, and invented the personal essay by writing about himself honestly, wrote that the greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to oneself. Fromm would add, and the second greatest thing is to know how to belong to another without losing the first. Chapter 5. The First Door, Care. Fromm identified 4 elements that he believed constituted love wherever it genuinely appeared. Not feelings, but activities. Things you do. Practices. The first is care. Care, as Fromm defined it, is active concern for the life and growth of the person you love. Not passive affection. Not the warm feeling that sits in the chest when you think of someone. Active concern, which means you pay attention to whether they are growing and you take that seriously. He gave a simple example. He asked, "Can you love a flower if you forget to water it?" The question sounds obvious, but he meant it seriously. If you say you love something, a plant, a child, a person, and you do not actively concern yourself with the conditions that allow that thing to thrive, then the word love is doing more work than it can bear. You have the feeling. You may even have the sentiment, but you do not have the practice. He was drawing on a tradition he had carried from his Talmudic studies, the idea that love is demonstrated through action, not through feeling. The great Maimonides, the 12th century scholar whose guide for the perplexed sat on Fromm's shelf alongside Freud and Marx, had written that righteousness is not a state of mind, but a set of actions performed even when the state of mind is not present. You act rightly and the right feeling follows, not the other way around. Fromm extended this to love. You tend the garden and the love follows, not the other way around. Notice your breath. It moves on its own. The room is quiet. Nothing is being asked of you. What does care look like in practice? It looks like paying attention to what the other person actually needs, as distinct from what you would prefer them to need. It looks like asking questions and meaning them. It looks like noticing, really noticing, when something has shifted. Not the dramatic shift, the small one, the quality of a silence, the thing they said twice in a week without seeming to realize it. Fromm spent years working with patients in New York and Mexico City who described loving their partners passionately while being unable to name a single thing their partner was currently struggling with. Not a single one. They had the feeling of love, they were certain of it, but they had not looked at the person recently enough to see them. Care requires looking. It requires the willingness to find out what is true about the other person right now in this season of their life, not what was true 2 years ago when you were still discovering them. And here is the deeper layer. Care also means concern for their growth, not just their comfort. These are not always the same thing. Fromm was careful about this. A love that only comforts, that protects someone from every difficulty, that smooths every rough surface before they can encounter it, is not care. It is protection that prevents development. Real care sometimes means allowing the difficulty, sometimes means not solving it, sometimes means sitting with someone while they solve it themselves. The body already knew this. The tightness you carry in your chest, some of it is the weight of having confused comfort with care for a long time. Not your fault. No one teaches the difference clearly. William James called habit the great flywheel of society. What he meant was, the patterns we repeat without deciding to repeat them determine most of what we are. Fromm would say the same of care. Make it a habit and it becomes character. Make it character and it becomes love. Chapter 6. The second door. Responsibility. The second element of love, as Fromm defined it, is responsibility. He was careful with this word. He did not mean obligation. He did not mean duty in the sense of a debt owed or a rule followed. He meant something older, the root of the word itself. Responsibility comes from the Latin responder, to answer. To be responsible for someone is to be able to answer them, to hear what they are calling for and to respond. This distinction matters more than it might seem. Obligation produces resentment. It is the love that calculates, that keeps ledgers. You did this for me, so I must do this for you. When the ledger feels unbalanced, the love feels strained. This is not responsibility in Fromm's sense, this is accounting. Responsibility in Fromm's sense is not about ledgers, it is about readiness. The readiness to hear a call from the other person and to answer it, not because the rules require it, because you have chosen to be the person who answers. He illustrated this with something that sounds simple. The ability to say, I am here. Not as a promise about the future, which no one can guarantee, but as a description of right now. In this moment, when you speak, I am listening. In this moment, when you need, I am available. This is the simplest form of responsibility and also the rarest. Let your jaw soften. Let the muscles in your face release. There is nothing to hold. Fromm observed that modern people are often responsive in a very selective sense. They respond to the calls they find manageable, the needs that fit their schedule, the difficulties that allow them to feel useful without requiring anything they are not willing to give. This is not irresponsibility exactly. It is a partial responsibility, a responsibility that protects itself. Full responsibility, as he understood it, is less comfortable than that. It requires the willingness to respond to the call even when the call is inconvenient, even when it arrives at the wrong time, even when what the other person needs from you is not something you particularly want to provide. This is not martyrdom. It is the simple acknowledgement that the other person's needs do not arrange themselves around your schedule. He was drawing on what he had observed in his clinical practice. The most common complaint he heard from partners was not that their loved one was unkind, it was that their loved one was absent when it mattered. Present in the room, but not available. Technically there, but not answering. Responsibility also has another dimension that Fromm thought crucial. It extends to the other person's freedom. You cannot be genuinely responsible for someone while simultaneously trying to control them. Control masquerades as care. I am only doing this because I love you, because I am worried, because I know what is best. But it is, Fromm said, the opposite of responsibility. It is the imposition of your anxieties onto another person and calling it love. Genuine responsibility says, I am here. I will respond to what you call for, and I will let you grow in the direction you need to grow, even when that direction is unfamiliar to me. Spinoza, working alone in his small rented room in The Hague in the 1670s, the excommunicated lens grinder, who had become the most careful thinker of his century, wrote that freedom is not the absence of determination, but the understanding of one's own nature. Fromm extended this to love. You cannot be responsible for another person's freedom while denying it. Chapter 7. The third door. Respect. The third element is respect. Fromm went back to the Latin again, respicere, to look again, to look a second time with fresh eyes as if you have not already decided what you are going to see. This is harder than it sounds. In any relationship that has lasted more than a few years, the partners have built up elaborate models of each other, pictures of who the other person is, what they want, how they will respond, what they are capable of. These models are useful. They are also, inevitably, outdated. People change. The person sitting across from you at dinner tonight is not quite the person you married, the person you moved in with, the person you have been carrying in your mind as your image of them. They have added things, shed things, shifted in ways you may not have noticed because you have been looking at the image rather than the person. Respect, as Fromm defined it, is the willingness to look again, to put the model down and look at the actual person in front of you with the same curiosity you would bring to someone you had never met. He was not suggesting that long familiarity is a problem. He was suggesting that familiarity without fresh attention is a kind of blindness. We stop seeing people we know well. We see what we expect to see, and that expectation is both a comfort and a cage. The cage is more apparent in what we miss: the person's current concerns, their recent shifts, the ways they have grown or contracted in the past year. The person who knew their partner exactly, who could predict their responses, who had memorized their patterns and never updated that knowledge, is not respecting them, they are respecting a photograph. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Let the warmth of the bed settle into you. Fromm also emphasized something less obvious. Respect is impossible without freedom. You cannot truly respect someone you control. The controlled person is not free to be what they are. They are only free to be what they are permitted to be. And the unfree person cannot surprise you, cannot grow in directions you did not anticipate, cannot be genuinely other than you, which is the whole point of being in relation to another person. You need someone who is genuinely not you. That is why they matter. He had learned something from his years with patients. The person who claimed to love their partner deeply while also being unable to tolerate any decision the partner made independently was not respecting the partner. They were using the language of love to describe a project of management. This is very common. It is very painful for everyone involved. True respect also has a component of delight. The delight of discovering that the other person is larger than your model of them. The surprise of someone you thought you knew saying something that reminds you there is more of them than you have seen. This delight is available in every long relationship that has been tended with genuine attention. It is not available in relationships where the partners have stopped looking. Hannah Arendt, who escaped an internment camp in 1940 and walked out into a stateless existence with nothing but her mind, wrote later that solitude is not the same as loneliness. Solitude is being with yourself. Loneliness is losing contact with both yourself and others simultaneously. Fromm would add, the respectful relationship is one in which two solitudes remain intact while the people who hold them choose to be together. Chapter 8, The Fourth Door, Knowledge. The fourth element of love is knowledge, not information, not biography. Knowledge. Fromm meant something precise by this. He meant the willingness to see past the surface presentation of another person, past what they show, past what they intend to show, to something closer to what they actually are. This requires a particular kind of attention, because most people are presenting a version of themselves that is designed to be manageable, to be likable, to invite a specific response. The mask is not dishonest, exactly. It is protective. Everyone wears one. Love, Fromm said, is the practice of seeing past the mask, not removing it forcibly. That is not love. That is violation. But attending patiently and with genuine curiosity until the person feels safe enough to set the mask down themselves, and being present without judgment when they do. He connected this to a much older tradition. The Talmudic scholar knows that the surface of a text is not its depth. You read the words, yes, but you also read what the words are trying to say that they cannot say directly. You look for what is present in the absence. You listen for what is not quite being said. Love requires the same skill set. In his clinical work, Fromm noticed that the most common form of not knowing was this: the partner who had learned the surface and stopped there. They knew the other person's preferences, their habits, their triggers, their history in outline, but they did not know the other person's fear. They did not know what the other person's deepest hope looked like in its current, present tense form, not the abstract aspiration, but the live one, the one that was operating right now and shaping every decision they were making. The fear and the hope are often hidden not because the person is secretive, but because they themselves may not have articulated them. Love, then, is also a kind of companionship in the project of self-knowledge. You help the other person know themselves more clearly by attending to them with enough care that things surface which would not surface alone. Something shifts here. There is a second kind of knowledge Fromm described, one that appears in The Art of Loving as a kind of paradox. He called it the paradox of knowing. The more deeply you know another person, the more you have seen of their interior life, their contradictions, their fear and their hope, the more mysterious they become, not less, more, because each revelation opens onto further depth. The person you have loved for 30 years is more mysterious to you than the person you met at the beginning, if you have been paying attention. They have become more, not less. This is the opposite of the common complaint about long relationships, that the other person has become predictable, that all the mystery has drained out. Fromm said, if that has happened, you have stopped looking. The mystery does not drain out. The attention does. Let your breath move slowly. The room holds you. The night holds the room. Baruch Spinoza, writing alone in The Hague in the years after his excommunication from the Amsterdam synagogue, argued in the Ethics that the highest form of knowledge is not factual knowledge, but what he called intuitive knowledge, a way of understanding that grasps the whole of a thing at once, its essence rather than its properties. Fromm believed love was the closest a person could come to this kind of knowing in relation to another human being. Not a list of facts about them, a felt understanding of what they are. He would spend decades trying to explain why the most capable people are often worst at exactly this, the practice of knowing another person. The answer, when it came, was quieter than expected. We will reach it. Chapter 9, The Man Who Made You and the Fear He Left Behind. Before Fromm could explain what love is, he needed to explain where most people's love troubles actually come from. And the answer he found was in the earliest room. He distinguished between two fundamental types of love, not in the sense of better or worse, but in the sense of structurally different. He called them mother love and father love. Mother love, in its ideal form, is unconditional. It does not have to be earned. It is not contingent on behavior, on performance, on being good enough or quiet enough or smart enough. It says, you are loved because you exist. The child who has received this in sufficient measure grows into someone who has, at the deepest level, permission to rest. They have been given something no accomplishment can produce, the basic assurance that their existence is welcome. Father love, in its ideal form, is conditional, and Fromm meant this not as a critique, but as a description of its particular value. Father love says, you are loved when you achieve, when you try, when you live up to certain principles. It teaches that effort matters, that the world responds to what you do, not merely to what you are. The child who has received healthy father love grows into someone who believes in the connection between action and consequence, who can build, persist, take the long view. Both are necessary. Neither is sufficient alone. If your mind has been drifting, that is fine. Come back gently. We are still here. The problem, and this is what Fromm saw in clinic after clinic, patient after patient, is that most adults are still running on the programming installed by whichever love they received or failed to receive in those early years. The person whose mother love was insufficient goes through life searching for a source of unconditional permission. They need to be loved without conditions, and when the conditions inevitably appear, as they must in any adult relationship, they experience this as abandonment, as the withdrawal of the only thing that makes them feel safe. The person whose father love was insufficient or was made cruel, conditional in the punishing sense rather than the encouraging sense, goes through life either relentlessly performing to earn love they suspect they will never receive, or refusing to perform at all as a way of protecting themselves from the judgment they expect. Neither of these people is broken. They are predictable. They are doing exactly what they were trained to do in the most important years of their formation by the people who mattered most. The training is running perfectly. It is just running in a context for which it was not designed. Fromm was not interested in assigning blame. His Frankfurt years, his training in the prophetic tradition, his own experience of displacement, all of these had given him a particular allergy to the comfortable narrative of personal fault. People are not bad lovers because they chose to be bad lovers. They are imperfect lovers because they were imperfectly loved, and because no one ever showed them the practice. The room is quiet. Your body is settling. Let your jaw be soft. Epictetus, the philosopher born a slave in Rome, who taught that freedom is not a condition but a relationship to your own judgments, wrote in the Enchiridion that what disturbs people is not what happens to them, but their opinion of what happens to them. Fromm extended this to love. What shapes your love life is not what happened to you in childhood, but the story you have built around what happened. And the story, unlike the event, can be examined and revised. Not tonight. Tonight, we only name the rooms. The examination can wait until you are ready. Chapter 10. What freedom actually costs. In 1941, Fromm published a book that was not about love at all, or so it seemed. It was about politics, about the rise of fascism in Europe, about why millions of people had freely and enthusiastically surrendered their freedom to authoritarian leaders. It was called Escape from Freedom, and it turned out to be, at its core, a book about love. Fromm's argument was this: modern people are freer than any human beings who have ever lived. They are free from the explicit structures of feudal obligation, from the church that told them what to think, from the guild that told them what to do. The old walls have come down. They can choose their work, their partners, their beliefs, their identities, and this freedom is terrifying. He was not being paradoxical for effect. He was being precise. The freedom that came with the collapse of traditional structures is real, and it is enormous, and it carries with it something that the medieval peasant in his constrained and determined life did not have to face: the full weight of having to decide who you are. The medieval peasant knew what he was. He was defined by his village, his church, his family, his lord. He had no freedom, but he had a place. He belonged somewhere. The anxiety of existence, the awareness that you are an individual separate from everyone else, that you must account for yourself, that your life is yours to make or fail to make, was managed by the structures around him. Those structures are gone, and in their place is a freedom that most people find, when they examine it honestly, profoundly uncomfortable. Breathe. Let your body remember it knows how. What Fromm found remarkable was not that people experience this discomfort. He expected that. What surprised him was the consistency of the response. Instead of finding the courage to live with the discomfort of genuine freedom, most people found ways to escape it. They gave their freedom away, not always to a dictator, often to something much more intimate: a controlling partner, a suffocating job, a group identity that told them exactly what to think and feel and want. The surrender felt like relief, and Fromm took that seriously. He did not dismiss the people who made these choices as weak or stupid. He understood that freedom without the internal resources to bear it is not a gift. It is a burden. And the human response to an unbearable burden is to set it down. This is connected to love in a way that is easy to miss. The person who cannot bear the weight of their own freedom cannot love freely. They can only merge. They can only possess. They can only need. Because genuine love, the love Fromm was describing, the practiced, disciplined, attentive love, requires that both people remain free. And freedom requires the capacity to be alone with yourself, to know yourself, to be, at bottom, your own ground. The person who has escaped their freedom cannot be that. They have given it away. And so what they call love is really a different transaction, the exchange of two unfreedoms, the mutual arrangement of two people who need each other to function as a substitute for the self neither of them has fully inhabited. Montaigne, in his tower in 1571, surrounded by books, having given up his legal career and his public life after the death of his best friend Etienne de la Boétie, wrote that the greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to oneself. He was describing what Fromm meant by freedom, not the absence of constraint, but the presence of a self that knows its own shape. Chapter 11, The Escape Routes. Fromm mapped 3 paths of escape from the weight of freedom. He was not judging the people who took them. He was trying to understand why. The first escape is authoritarianism. This takes many forms, some obvious and some subtle. The obvious form is submission to an external authority, a leader, a religion, an ideology that provides a complete account of what to think and how to live. The subtle form is the personal relationship in which one person surrenders entirely to the will of the other. Both involve the same relief. You no longer have to decide. Someone else is deciding. You are safe inside the certainty of another will larger than your own. And there is a pleasure in this. Fromm was careful to name it. The pleasure of submission is the pleasure of rest, of no longer being responsible for the terrible burden of being a self. The masochistic component of authoritarianism is not a pathology in the way we usually mean that word. It is an extremely understandable response to a real difficulty. The second escape is destructiveness. When the freedom of existence becomes unbearable, when the world outside seems too complex, too indifferent, too beyond any individual's capacity to influence, some people respond by destroying what seems to threaten them. The destructive impulse says, if I cannot make the world respond to me, I can at least make it feel the mark of my existence. In its most extreme forms, this is violence. In its everyday forms, it is the contempt that shrinks other people, the cynicism that finds everything worthless, the pleasure taken in failure that is not one's own. Let the darkness hold you. You do not need to understand it all. Let the parts that matter find you. The third escape, the most popular, the most successful, the most invisible, is automaton conformity, the person who becomes exactly what their social group expects them to be. Who adopts the opinions, the desires, the personality that the market or the class or the family or the neighborhood has indicated it wants. They are not conforming consciously. The conformity has gone deeper than that. They have become the expectation. They experience their manufactured desires as genuine, their adopted opinions as their own, their social performance as their authentic self. Fromm described this person with great compassion because he saw how completely the process worked. The automaton conformist does not feel like a conformist. They feel like themselves. The cage has been internalized so thoroughly that they experience it as their own will. He connected this to love. The automaton conformist cannot love freely because they do not know at a sufficient depth who they are. They know who they are supposed to be. They know the role. But beneath the role there is, Fromm worried, sometimes very little that the person has actually inhabited. And you cannot give what you do not have. You cannot share an interior life you have not explored. This is the uncomfortable center of escape from freedom. Not that people are controlled from outside. That they have arranged their own containment and called it choice. Seneca, the Roman philosopher who advised the Emperor Nero while writing privately about the shortness of life and the waste of it, said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it." Fromm would specify the waste. We spend the years running from the one thing that would make them worth having lived, the encounter with our own authentic nature. Chapter 12. Authoritarianism's Hidden Offer. The authoritarian bargain is worth examining closely because it appears in intimate relationships far more often than it appears in politics. Fromm distinguished between two poles of the authoritarian character: the submissive pole and the dominant pole. He noted with characteristic precision that they are not opposites. They are the same structure seen from different positions in the same arrangement. The submissive person needs someone to submit to. Their anxiety is the anxiety of the unmoored. Without a strong authority to organize their world, they feel lost, unreal, disconnected from a sense of purpose. The dominant person needs someone to control. Their anxiety is the anxiety of the unloved. Without the assurance that someone depends on them utterly, they feel unnecessary, invisible, uncertain of their own value. Both are looking for the same thing: safety. The submissive person finds safety in merger, in giving themselves so completely to another that the terrifying weight of individual existence is shared, or appears to be shared. The dominant person finds safety in control, in making another person's world so entirely their own construction that they cannot be surprised by it. Neither of these is love. Fromm was very clear about this. The relationship between a dominant and a submissive person may feel like love from the inside. The submissive person may describe what they feel as devotion. The dominant person may describe what they feel as deep concern. But both are missing the element that Fromm considered essential to love: the wish for the other person's freedom and growth. The authoritarian relationship requires the other person to remain as they are or to become more of what serves the arrangement. Change threatens it. Growth threatens it. The development of independence in the submissive partner threatens the dominant partner's sense of safety. The development of strength in the submissive partner feels, from inside the arrangement, like abandonment. Let your body rest where it is. The weight of you is held. Nothing requires your attention now. Fromm observed something that his patients rarely saw from inside their situations. The dominant partner in an authoritarian relationship is often more dependent on the submissive partner than the reverse. They have organized their entire sense of self around the control arrangement. Remove the arrangement and the dominant person has no orientation. The submissive person, at least, can eventually find another authority to submit to. The dominant person has to rebuild their entire sense of self from scratch. This is why authoritarian relationships are so difficult to leave from either side. The logic of the arrangement, the mutual dependence, the mutual fulfillment of the other's anxiety is very coherent. What is missing is almost invisible from inside: the other person's actual face, their actual fear, their actual desire for something other than the arrangement. He was not blaming people for ending up in these patterns. He was trying to make the pattern visible, because invisible patterns cannot be examined, and patterns that cannot be examined cannot be changed. Viktor Frankl, writing from his experience in 4 concentration camps, said that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves, Fromm would add. But first, we must see the situation clearly enough to know whether it can be changed or not. The authoritarian arrangement can be changed, but only when both people decide they want something the arrangement cannot provide. Chapter 13, The Conformist Bargain. The third escape route from freedom is the most successful because it is the most complete. When authoritarianism keeps some distance between the self and the authority, there is still, however submissive, a self that knows it is submitting. Conformity eliminates even that distance. The conformist does not know they have escaped. They have become the escape. Fromm described what he called the marketing character, the personality type that the 20th century produced most reliably. The marketing character does not have a fixed set of values or convictions or desires. They have a very refined sense of what the market, their social group, their workplace, their class, the culture at large wants from them, and they supply it. They are extraordinarily adaptable. They are excellent in the short term. They are almost impossible to know in the long term because there is not enough consistency beneath the surface to know. He was not talking about flexibility or social skill. He was talking about something more troubling. The person whose relationship to their own desires, opinions, and values is entirely mediated by what others want from them. They feel what they are supposed to feel. They want what they have been shown they should want, and they experience all of this as authentic, which is what makes the situation so difficult to address. The door left open, the conversation that never happened, the self that was put away to make room for what was needed. How does this connect to love? In precisely this way. You cannot truly love someone if you do not exist as a self distinct enough from them to make the choice. Love requires two people who are genuinely different, genuinely present, genuinely themselves, because love is the encounter of two distinct beings, not the merger of two performances. When the conformist loves, they love in the way they have been shown love is done. They follow the script, they hit the marks. They feel, in a real and sincere way, the feelings the script calls for. But they cannot give the thing that love most requires: genuine, unpredictable, particular attention to the other person as they actually are. Because the conformist is not paying that quality of attention to anyone, including themselves. Fromm watched this in New York in the 1940s and 1950s with something between sorrow and fascination. The city was full of people who were, by any external measure, successful. They worked hard, they were sociable, they married, they raised children, they accumulated the symbols of the good life. And in his consulting room, they described a pervasive sense of unreality. Not exactly unhappiness, something stranger, the sense of not being quite present in their own lives, of watching themselves move through the expected scenes. Let your eyelids rest. The night is full. You have done enough for today. He thought the key was not the absence of suffering. These people were not suffering in any dramatic sense, but the absence of contact. They were not making real contact with their own experience, and so they could not make real contact with anyone else's. The feeling of love requires as its precondition the feeling of being a self that can love. And that requires the courage to remain present to your own interior life, even when it is inconvenient, even when it does not match what is expected. Chapter 14: The Marketplace of Personalities. In The Art of Loving, Fromm described what he saw as the dominant paradigm of love in modern society. He called it the exchange of personalities on the marketplace of love. He was being precise, not cynical. His observation was this: in a market economy, every transaction is organized around exchange. You have something I want, I have something you want. We assess the relative value of what each is offering, and we trade. This logic, Fromm argued, had colonized the experience of love without most people noticing. When two people meet and assess each other as potential partners, they are, whether they know it or not, engaging in a kind of market evaluation. Am I getting a fair deal? What are they bringing to this exchange? Their looks, their social status, their earning capacity, their emotional availability, their kindness, and does it correspond to what I am bringing? Is this an equitable transaction? He noted that this produces a very specific kind of love. Love that is stable as long as the exchange feels fair, and that becomes restless when the balance shifts. When one partner's value in the market changes, through illness, through aging, through career change, through any of the 1,000 ways a person changes over time, the other partner's satisfaction with the arrangement shifts accordingly. Not because they are cruel, because the logic of the arrangement was market logic, and market logic tracks value. Nothing about the market is wrong as a way of organizing commerce. It is catastrophic as a way of organizing love. There is a quieter layer beneath that. What Fromm observed, and this is the detail that keeps the observation alive, is that people in market logic relationships do not experience themselves as being in market logic relationships. They experience themselves as being in love. The language is the same, the feelings are similar, but the underlying structure is different, and the structure determines what happens when things get difficult. In a market relationship, difficulty is a problem with the arrangement. The solution is renegotiation or exit. In a love relationship, in Fromm's sense of love as practiced art, difficulty is a feature of the terrain. The solution is more practice, deeper attention, more genuine effort. The difficulty is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that the practice is being asked to deepen. He was not naive about this. He knew that some relationships should end. He was not arguing for the imprisonment of two people in an incompatible arrangement in the name of love. He was arguing that the decision to end should be made on the basis of genuine assessment. Are we two people who cannot find a way to love each other? Rather than on the basis of a market calculation, am I getting a fair return on this investment? Montaigne, writing in his tower in the 1580s about his extraordinary friendship with Etienne de la Boétie, used a phrase that Fromm would have recognized: because it was him, because it was me. No further reason, no accounting, no market logic, just the irreducible fact of two particular people having found each other. That is not a romantic ideal. Fromm would say it is a description of what love, practiced at its best, actually feels like. Chapter 15, Symbiosis and Its Masks. Fromm used the word symbiosis in a way that requires some care. In biology, symbiosis describes a relationship between two organisms in which both benefit from the arrangement and can, in principle, survive without each other but choose the arrangement because it serves both. Fromm used it differently. He used it to describe relationships in which two people have become so completely organized around each other that neither can function independently. He meant it as a warning, not a compliment. He identified two varieties. The first he called masochistic symbiosis, the arrangement in which one partner has dissolved their own self-sufficiency entirely into the other. They need the other person to function. They cannot make decisions without the other's input. They cannot be comfortable alone. Their entire identity has been organized around the relationship, and the relationship has become their substitute for a self. He was careful to say that this feels like love. From inside the masochistic arrangement, the feeling is one of profound devotion. I need you. I cannot live without you. You are everything to me. These are the lines the culture has taught us to recognize as the deepest expressions of love. Fromm said, they are actually descriptions of a person who has not yet fully arrived in their own existence. The need is real. The love is partial. The second variety he called sadistic symbiosis, the arrangement in which one partner has made the other their object, has incorporated them so completely into their own projects, needs, and identity that the other person exists primarily as a function of the dominant partner's world. I cannot live without you here, where I can see you. I cannot live without knowing I shape your decisions. Again, this can be experienced from inside as love, deep concern, intense attachment, a desperate need for the other's presence. Fromm said, it is actually a form of control dressed in the costume of love. The body already knew this. The place in the chest where something is held too tightly. What both varieties have in common is that they eliminate the element Fromm considered the soul of love, the other person's genuine freedom. In the symbiotic arrangement, the other person cannot grow away from you without threatening the entire structure. Their independence is experienced as abandonment. Their development is experienced as betrayal. Their need for solitude is experienced as rejection. And so, the symbiotic partner does everything they can, consciously or not, to prevent the other person from developing the independence that would make the arrangement unnecessary. They increase the other's dependence. They undermine their confidence outside the relationship. They make leaving feel impossible. Fromm had seen this in his clinical practice many times. He had seen it also in the larger political arrangements of the 20th century, where entire populations had been organized into symbiotic dependency with their states. The mechanism was the same. The scale was different. True union, what Fromm called the goal of love, is the opposite of symbiosis. It is the union of two people who are complete enough in themselves to choose each other freely, not to complete themselves, to accompany each other. The distinction sounds subtle. It is everything. Chapter 16. The Shadow Side of Giving. You do not need to have followed every word. The parts that matter will find you. Come back gently. We are still here. There is a pattern Fromm noticed that he found particularly worth naming because it masquerades so successfully as virtue. He called it compulsive giving. The compulsive giver gives constantly. They give attention, time, energy, resources, care, sometimes to a degree that exhausts them and that others find both touching and slightly alarming. They cannot stop. They are driven by a need to give that has very little to do with what the other person actually needs, and very much to do with what the giver needs from the act of giving. What do they need? Usually, the reassurance that they are needed, that they are valuable, that their presence in the other person's life is indispensable. The giving is not a gift. It is a loan that accumulates interest in the form of the giver's expectation, that they will be recognized, acknowledged, that their sacrifices will be met with gratitude sufficient to justify them. When the expected gratitude does not arrive, or does not arrive in the form or quantity the giver had imagined, the giver feels betrayed. They gave everything, and the other person was ungrateful. They do not notice that what they gave was not what was asked for. They do not notice that the giving was organized around their own need, not the other person's. Fromm did not dismiss this as simple selfishness. The compulsive giver is often genuinely generous in one important sense. The sacrifice is real. They do give, and it does cost them. But the gift is wrapped in an expectation that makes it, at bottom, a transaction rather than a gift. The true gift asks nothing in return. It is given because the other person needs it, not because the giver needs to give. Let your jaw soften. Let the breath move all the way down. The room is quiet around you. He connected this to the larger question of productivity. Fromm believed that the capacity to give freely without the driven, anxious quality of the compulsive giver was the sign of what he called the productive character. The productive character does not give from lack, they give from abundance. They have enough internal resource that the giving does not deplete them. They give because it flows naturally from who they are, not because they need the giving to establish who they are. This is closely related to what he would say later about self-love. The person who has not built sufficient self-regard, who does not experience themselves as valuable independent of what they produce and give, can only give in the driven, anxious way. They need the giving to feel real. They need the gratitude to confirm their existence. The person who has built the foundation of self-regard can give in the other way, freely, without accounting, without the accumulated ledger. And when they give, the other person receives it as a gift rather than as an obligation incurred. Simone Weil, who left her teaching position to work on the Renault factory floor in Paris in 1934, because she refused to write about labor she had not experienced herself, wrote in a letter that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Fromm would agree, the attention that comes without a hidden ledger is rarer than any material gift. And it is, ultimately, what most people are actually asking for when they say they want to be loved. Chapter 17. What you inherited without asking. Fromm developed a concept he called the social character. It is one of his most useful and most underappreciated ideas. The social character is the set of personality traits, the patterns of feeling, thinking, wanting, and relating that a particular society produces in its members because those traits are necessary for the society to function, not through coercion exactly, through something more subtle, through the way children are raised, the values that are celebrated and punished, the stories that are told about what a good person looks like, the emotional environment that surrounds the developing child. The result is that by the time a person becomes an adult, they have a personality that feels entirely their own, their preferences, their anxieties, their desires, their ideals. But that is, in significant measure, a social product. They want what their society needs them to want. They fear what their society needs them to fear. They love in the way their society has taught them love looks like. This is not a conspiracy. No one designed it. It emerges from the ordinary mechanics of socialization, of learning, from very early on, what earns warmth and what earns coldness, what is celebrated and what is hidden. The quieter layer beneath that, the things you were taught to want that you never questioned, because questioning them would have meant questioning the people who loved you. Fromm was not arguing that people are simply programmed robots. He believed deeply in human freedom and human responsibility, but he was arguing that freedom cannot be exercised until you can see the programming clearly. The person who does not know they are carrying a social character cannot make genuine choices. They can only follow the script while believing they are improvising. His work with patients in New York and later in Cuernavaca in Mexico made this very concrete. He would sit with a person who described themselves as deeply individualistic, someone who prized self-reliance, who believed in hard work and personal achievement, who valued independence above almost everything else. And he would ask gentle questions about whether they had ever chosen these values or whether they had absorbed them from the particular American cultural context in which they had grown up. The question was not asked to undermine the values. It was asked to make them genuinely available as choices. Something shifts here, because a value that is merely absorbed is fragile. It cannot withstand pressure from the outside. When the hard-working, self-reliant person encounters a situation in which their framework does not apply, illness, grief, a love that requires dependence, they have no resources, because the framework was never examined. They never knew which parts of it were theirs and which parts were installed. The examined value is different. When you have asked yourself why you believe what you believe, not to deconstruct it, but to understand it, you have made it your own. And what is your own can be held and also, when necessary, set down. Hannah Arendt, whose political philosophy was built on the idea that freedom requires the ability to begin something new, to act in ways that cannot be predicted from what has come before, believed that thinking, the soundless dialogue of the self with itself, was the precondition of ethical life. Fromm would agree. Without the inner examination, the social character runs on autopilot, and love runs on autopilot with it. Chapter 18. The social character in love. Fromm identified several social character types. The one he found most prevalent in mid-century America, and the one most relevant to understanding modern love, he called the marketing character. The marketing character has a particular relationship to themselves. They experience themselves as a commodity. Not in a degraded sense, they do not think of themselves as lesser. They think of themselves as a product that must be packaged attractively, presented in the most favorable light, positioned well in the relevant market. This works quite well in many areas of modern life. The job interview, the networking event, the first impression. The marketing character is skilled at all of these because they have refined the art of self-presentation to a very high degree. But it creates a specific problem in love. Love requires at some point the willingness to be seen without the packaging. To be present to another person as you actually are, uncertain, inconsistent, sometimes afraid, sometimes petty, sometimes larger than the packaging would suggest. The marketing character finds this extremely difficult. They have invested so heavily in the performance that the person beneath the performance is not always sure of their own existence. Fromm noted that the marketing character does not experience love as a practice. They experience it as a performance review. Am I doing this well? Am I being a good partner? Is the other person satisfied? These are not the wrong questions, but they are questions organized around the performance rather than the connection. The marketing character tends the image of the relationship rather than the relationship itself. Let the breath come and go. You do not need to tend it. He contrasted this with what he called the productive character, not productive in the economic sense of generating output, but productive in the sense of being actively oriented toward growth, connection, and the full exercise of human capacities. The productive character loves by giving, not compulsively, as we saw, but freely. Their giving grows from their own fullness. They are oriented toward the other person's actual reality rather than their own performance of caring. The productive character is not a type of person so much as a direction, a way of relating that is developed through practice, through the willingness to examine one's own patterns, through the accumulated experience of having genuinely attended to another human being and discovered what that costs and what it returns. Fromm believed, and this is one of his most important convictions, that the productive character was available to anyone. It was not a trait you were born with or without. It was a capacity that could be developed. The way music can be learned, the way a language can be learned, through sustained, honest, sometimes uncomfortable effort. He also believed, and this connects directly to the political argument in Escape from Freedom, that modern society makes the development of the productive character very difficult. Not impossible, difficult. The pressures toward conformity, toward the marketing orientation, toward the organization of one's life around acquisition and performance. These are structural pressures, not personal failures. Recognizing them as structural is the first step toward doing something about them. Chapter 19. Brotherly Love's Foundation. All other forms of love, Fromm argued, grow from a single root, what he called brotherly love. He meant something specific by the word, not familial affection, not the warmth of friendship, not the particular bond of people with a shared history. He meant the fundamental orientation toward all other human beings, the recognition that what is essentially human in you is essentially human in them, that their suffering matters because suffering is suffering, that their desire to be known and to belong is as real and as valid as your own. This is the love described by the Hebrew prophets he had read under Rabbi Nobel in Frankfurt, the love of the stranger, the love that does not require the other person to be like you, to share your history, to have earned your regard, the love that begins from the simple acknowledgement that they are here, that they are real, that they are carrying something. He believed this form of love was the precondition for all the others. If you cannot extend basic human regard to strangers, if your love is reserved only for those who are already close to you, already useful to you, already familiar, then what you are practicing is attachment, not love. Attachment is real and valuable, but it is not the same thing. Brotherly love is the practice of recognizing the other person's humanity before you know anything else about them. It is the quality of attention that does not require the other person to first prove their worth. Notice your breath, let it slow. He gave examples from very different traditions to show how widely this principle appears. The Talmudic commandment to love the stranger, the New Testament injunction to love your enemy, the Buddhist concept of compassion, karuna, which extends to all sentient beings without discrimination, the Stoic idea which Marcus Aurelius wrote about in his tent on the Danube frontier in 170 AD, that all rational beings share a common origin and a common membership in the human community. These traditions were not saying the same thing in every respect, but they converged on a single observation. The capacity to love any particular person depends on first developing a basic orientation of care toward people in general. The man who is kind only to his family is practicing a form of love that is still organized around the self, the extension of the self into the family group. Brotherly love requires a step beyond that. Fromm connected this to his critique of narcissism, which he would develop more fully. The narcissist cannot practice brotherly love because they cannot genuinely recognize that other people have an interior life as real and as valid as their own. Their attention stays on the surface of others, on what others can provide, what they think, whether they approve, because they have not made the turn toward genuine curiosity about another person's inner world. Brotherly love is, at its foundation, a turn toward genuine curiosity. It says, "You are real. What is it like to be you?" He thought this question asked with real intention, was rarer than almost any material generosity, and he thought it was the seed from which everything else in love grows. Chapter 20: Self-Love and Its Confusion. This is the chapter Fromm's readers find most surprising and often most useful. He argued that self-love is not the opposite of love for others. It is its precondition. He had to argue against a very deep cultural assumption to make this point. The assumption is that love is essentially self-sacrificial, that the loving person is the one who gives without counting, who puts others first, who denies themselves for the sake of those they love. Self-love, in this view, is the enemy of love for others. The selfish person loves themselves at others' expense. Fromm said, "This is backwards." He observed that the person who is genuinely selfish, who takes without giving, who treats others as instruments, who has no real interest in anyone else's welfare, is not a person who loves themselves excessively. They are a person who does not love themselves at all. They are driven not by abundance, but by anxiety. They acquire because they are afraid they do not have enough. They take because they have not built the internal resource that would make giving feel safe. The selfish person is deeply anxious about themselves. They are often profoundly self-critical beneath the surface. The acquisitiveness, the taking, the self-centeredness, these are symptoms of self-insufficiency, not self-excess. Let your eyelids rest, let the darkness be soft. True self-love, as Fromm defined it, is the cultivation of a genuine, realistic, caring relationship with yourself. Not the relationship of flattery, telling yourself you are wonderful when you are not, inflating your self-image to escape discomfort. The relationship of care, tending to your own growth, your own knowledge, your own integrity, with the same active concern you would bring to someone you love. This is the same care he described in the 4 elements. Active concern for the life and growth of the person you love. When the person you love is yourself, the practice is the same. You notice when you are growing and you support it. You notice when you are shrinking and you ask why. You hold yourself with respect. You try to see yourself as you actually are, rather than as you wish you were or fear you are. You take responsibility for yourself. You try to know yourself as honestly as the enterprise allows. The person who has built this relationship with themselves has a resource. The compulsive giver and the marketing character do not have. They can be with themselves. They can tolerate being alone without it feeling like punishment. They can observe their own thoughts without being entirely at their mercy. They have, in the most literal sense, their own company. And from this, from the company of a self that is inhabited and not merely performed, genuine love for others becomes possible, because you are no longer giving from deficit. You are not loving from a desperate need to be needed. You are not performing love to confirm your own existence. You have enough, and from enough, you can give freely. Carl Rogers, the American psychologist who founded person-centered therapy and wrote in On Becoming a Person, that the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. Understood exactly what Fromm was describing. The self-acceptance is not permission to remain as you are. it is the precondition for becoming more. And love, in this sense, is both self-directed and directed outward. The same practice, the same attention, the same active concern applied in two directions at once. Chapter 21. The Quiet Narcissism. Narcissism, Fromm said, is often confused with self-love. The confusion is understandable. Both involve intense preoccupation with the self, but they are structurally opposite. The narcissist does not love themselves. They love an image of themselves. Fromm was precise about this. The narcissist has built an idealized picture of who they are: powerful, admired, special, uniquely capable, and they have devoted their emotional life to defending and maintaining that picture. Their self-regard is entirely organized around the image. Any challenge to the image, any criticism, any evidence of limitation, any encounter with failure is experienced as an assault on their entire existence, not on their performance, on their existence. This is why the narcissist responds to criticism so disproportionately. The criticism is not just wrong. In their experience, it is dangerous. It threatens the structure on which their entire sense of themselves rests. And this is precisely what self-love is not. Genuine self-love can accommodate criticism because it is not organized around an image. The person who genuinely loves themselves knows their limitations and includes them in their self-understanding. They can hear, "You did that poorly," and respond, "You are right, I did," without experiencing it as an annihilation. The image does not need to be protected because there is no image. There is a self with all its irregularities, and that self is what is loved. The room is still, the breath moves quietly. In relationships, the narcissist cannot practice love in Fromm's sense because they cannot genuinely see the other person. Their attention is monopolized by the task of monitoring and managing how the other person is regarding them. Are they impressed? Are they admiring? Are they confirming the image? The other person's actual interior life, their fear, their hope, their current struggle is almost entirely invisible to the narcissist because attending to it would require a redirect of attention that the maintenance of the image cannot permit. Fromm was careful to note that narcissism exists on a spectrum and that most people have some narcissistic elements in their makeup. He was not trying to diagnose or label. He was trying to identify the degree to which the preoccupation with the self-image prevents the genuine encounter with another. He also observed something that is easy to miss. The narcissist is often deeply lonely. The image they have built isolates them. Other people can engage with the performance, but no one can reach the person beneath it because the person beneath it is not permitted to surface. The loneliness is real, and it is rarely named, because naming it would require acknowledging that the image is not enough and the image is everything. Kierkegaard, that strange solitary genius in Copenhagen in the 1840s, who wrote that life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards, described something Fromm would recognize. The person who performs their existence rather than living it, who makes of their life a spectacle rather than an experience. The performer is never truly present. They are always slightly outside themselves, watching the performance, adjusting it. The cure, Fromm would say, is the same as always: practice. The practice of genuine attention to another, to yourself. The slow development of the capacity to be present without performing. Chapter 22, What the Mother Teaches First. He had a patient in New York. He described the type without identifying anyone. A successful man in his late 40s who had, by every external measure, built an admirable life. A career he had worked hard for, a family he loved, a house, a reputation. And yet he arrived each week at Fromm's consulting room, carrying something he could not name, a pervasive, sourceless unease. Not depression, exactly. Not anxiety, exactly. Something closer to homesickness for a place he had never been. Fromm spent months asking questions before the answer began to take shape. The man had grown up with a mother who loved him in a way that was, in its own terms, real and intense, but who had organized that love around her own needs rather than his. She was warm when he was small and manageable. She was cold when he was difficult, demanding, or assertive. She praised his compliance and withdrew when he pushed back. The love was real. The conditions on it were also real, and the conditions were the problem. The child had learned, with the efficiency of all children, the lesson that was available: that love must be earned, that he was not loved for existing but for performing, that the warmth was a response to the right behavior, not an unconditional given. He grew up to be a man who worked very hard and rested very uneasily. Let the weight of you settle, you are held. Nothing is being asked of you tonight. Fromm used this kind of case to illuminate what mother love at its best provides. Not warmth contingent on behavior, but the fundamental faith that you are welcome here, that your existence is not conditional, that there is a baseline of acceptance beneath all the performances and the failures and the ordinary human mess, a place you can return to when everything else has fallen short. The child who receives this in sufficient measure, not perfectly, no parent gives it perfectly, grows into someone who knows at a level below argument that they are allowed to be. This is not a small thing. It is the ground on which everything else in a person's life is built. The willingness to take risks, to make mistakes without being destroyed by them, to be seen without performing, all of these grow from the root of unconditional acceptance. The child who does not receive enough of this is not doomed. Fromm was very clear about this. He did not believe in determinism of the straightforward kind. But they carry an additional task, the task of finding or building or granting to themselves the permission that was not given in those early years. This is possible. It is also genuinely hard. Fromm thought that a significant part of what goes wrong in adult love, the compulsive giving, the desperate seeking of approval, the inability to rest in a relationship without needing constant reassurance, traced back to this early insufficiency. Not as an excuse, as an explanation that points toward a practice. The deliberate cultivation of the unconditional regard for oneself that was not adequately provided. Hermann Hesse, writing in Siddhartha, the story of a man who had to lose everything he had built before he could understand what he was seeking, described the moment when his protagonist stops looking for wisdom in the teachings of others and begins to look for it in himself. Wisdom cannot be imparted, Hesse wrote. What can be done is to be present to your own experience with enough patience and honesty that wisdom surfaces. Fromm would say the same is true of unconditional self-acceptance. It cannot be given, but it can be grown. Chapter 23. What the Father teaches next. Father love, in its healthy form, teaches the child something equally essential and structurally different. That effort matters. Not that effort is the only thing that matters. Not that love is earned only through achievement, but that the relationship between action and consequence is real, that you can change your situation through your choices, that the world responds to what you do as well as to what you are. The child who receives healthy father love grows into an adult who can persist, who can commit to something difficult and stay with it past the point of comfort, who believes at a level below conscious argument that their actions have some purchase on the world, that they are not merely passive recipients of whatever arrives, but agents who participate in shaping what comes. This is not the same as conditional love in the punishing sense. The father, who withholds affection until the child achieves a standard the child cannot reliably meet, who loves the performance and is indifferent to the child beneath it, is not practicing healthy father love. He is practicing the kind of conditionality that produces the compulsive performer, the person who works without rest and rests without peace, because there is always one more thing to achieve before the love can be claimed. Healthy father love says, I see what you are building and I will help you build it. I believe in your capacity to grow. When you fall short, I will help you understand why, not to punish you, but because I take your growth seriously. My love is not contingent on your success, but I care about your success because I care about you. A cadence beat, and here is its shape. The person who received neither mother love nor father love in healthy proportion is not broken. They are carrying two practices simultaneously. The practice of learning to accept their own existence unconditionally, and the practice of believing in their own capacity to act. Both can be learned. Both take time. Let your jaw soften. Let the muscles in your face release what they have been holding. Fromm noted that in modern Western society, the balance had shifted. Mother love, unconditional acceptance, was in relatively good supply in the culture's imagery. Therapy culture, emotional expression, the valorization of vulnerability. Father love, in the healthy sense, the belief in effort, the teaching of persistence and self-discipline, was more suspect, more likely to be pathologized as demanding or withholding. He thought both were necessary, and he thought the imbalance in either direction created specific difficulties. The person saturated with unconditional acceptance and deprived of any sense that effort matters tends to struggle with the sustained practice that love requires. The person saturated with conditional achievement love and deprived of basic acceptance tends to struggle with the rest that love also requires. The mature adult, Fromm argued, integrates both. They have enough unconditional acceptance of themselves, enough sense that their existence is permitted to rest without guilt. And they have enough of the effort-oriented orientation to practice their love actively, to show up even when the feeling is not present, to persist. Both are available. Both require work, and both, like everything Fromm described, begin with a clear picture of where you are starting from. Chapter 24: The Adolescent Who Never Left. If you are still awake, this is the part I wanted you to hear. Fromm identified something he called developmental arrest in love. He did not mean pathology in the clinical sense. He meant the common experience of an adult whose love life is still organized around the needs of an earlier stage of development, who is still, in some essential way, trying to get from adult relationships something that belongs to childhood. The person stuck in the mother love stage is looking for unconditional acceptance from their partners. They need to be loved without conditions, without being asked to change, without being held accountable, without the ordinary adult friction of two people who need different things. When the conditions appear, as they always do in any adult relationship, they experience this as the withdrawal of love. They do not experience it as the normal negotiation of two people with different needs. They experience it as the familiar pain of the conditional love that was insufficient in childhood. This person is not immature in the general sense. They may be highly capable, even exceptional, in the rest of their life. But in love, they are still the child asking, "Am I loved just for being here?" And no adult relationship can answer that question in the way the child needed it answered, because the adult world cannot replicate the specific conditions of early childhood, the total dependency, the complete availability of the parent. The question will not be satisfied by any amount of reassurance, because the reassurance is being asked to do something it cannot do. The person stuck in the father love stage is looking for love they can earn.
They organize their relationships around performance. They are the most attentive partner, the most reliable friend, the most productive member of the family, because they believe, at some level below argument, that if they are useful enough, good enough, essential enough, the love will be secured. And they cannot stop performing, even when they are exhausted, because stopping would feel like risking the love. Let your body rest in the dark. You have done enough today. Everything you were carrying can wait. Both of these are understandable responses to real experiences. Both are also very difficult to live with and very difficult to love from. Fromm's proposal was not simple. He did not say, "Understand this and you will be free of it." He said, "Understanding it is the first step." The practice follows from the understanding, the deliberate, sustained effort to develop the internal resources that were not adequately provided to build as an adult what was not built in childhood.
What does that practice look like? It looks like what he had been describing all along. The cultivation of genuine self-acceptance, the willingness to be present to yourself as you are, without the constant performance or the constant seeking of permission. The development of the effort orientation not as a way of earning love, but as a way of building something real. The practice of attention to others, real attention. The kind that requires you to put your own need for approval aside long enough to actually see someone. These are not small things, they are the work of years. Fromm was not offering a shortcut, he was offering a direction. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his tent on the Danube frontier in the year 170, wrote in what would become Book 2 of the Meditations, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." The urgency of that instruction is not about death, it is about presence. The question is always, what would you do if you knew the time was short? Fromm's answer: you would practice love properly, without the delay that comes from believing there will always be more time to get it right. Chapter 25. Mature love's first condition. Mature love has a signature. Fromm stated it as plainly as anything in The Art of Loving. The immature person says, "I love you because I need you." The mature person says, "I need you because I love you." The difference is in who comes first. In the immature formulation, the love is a function of the need. The other person is loved because they serve a function, because they fill something that was empty, because they ease an anxiety or supply a resource that the lover lacks. The love is real, but it is organized around the lover's deficit. In the mature formulation, the need is a consequence of the love. You become necessary to me because I have genuinely seen you and turned toward you. Because the encounter with your particular existence has mattered to me enough that your absence would be felt. The need arises from connection rather than the connection arising from need. This does not sound like a large distinction until you examine what happens when things get difficult. In the immature arrangement, difficulty threatens the function. If you are not meeting the need, the love is strained. In the mature arrangement, difficulty is just difficulty. The love does not depend on the other person's performance of any particular function. So it is not threatened by the ordinary failures and complications of being a full human being in a shared life. And here is the small detail that changes everything. Mature love expands both people. Immature love contracts them, either by requiring them to remain in a specific configuration that serves the arrangement, or by producing the resentment that builds when the arrangement fails to perform as expected. Mature love creates the conditions in which both people can grow, can change, can become more of what they are. Because the love is not contingent on who they are being right now. Let your breath slow. There is no hurry. The night holds all of this gently. Fromm came to this understanding through years of clinical observation and through his own reflections on a question he kept returning to. Why do so many intelligent, earnest, genuinely caring people fail at love. Not because they do not want it, because they are practicing the wrong version of it, a version organized around need and deficit rather than around genuine encounter. He was drawing on a tradition that extended back through Spinoza to the Talmudic sources he had studied as a young man. Spinoza had argued in the Ethics that love directed at something transient, something that can be taken from you, is always contaminated by anxiety. The lover of transient things loves with fear, because the thing can be lost. Only love directed at something that cannot be taken away, at the understanding of the beloved's nature, at the connection itself rather than its products, is free of that fear. Fromm translated this into practical terms. The love organized around need is always anxious, because the need might not be met. The love organized around genuine encounter is not anxious in the same way, because what it is organized around, the fact of the other person's existence and your genuine seeing of it, is not contingent on their performance. He did not claim this was easy. He claimed it was learnable. Chapter 26, The Practice. Here, Fromm shifted from analysis to instruction. He has spent many chapters describing what love is, what it is not, where it comes from, where it fails. Now he asked the practical question: if love is an art, what is the practice? He identified several components, not steps in a sequence exactly, more like the elements of a practice in the way that breathing, posture, and attention are all elements of meditation. They work together. None of them alone is sufficient. The first component is discipline, not the harsh, punitive kind. The kind a musician means when they talk about their practice, the commitment to show up regularly, to work even when you do not feel like it, to develop the capacity over time rather than expecting it to be immediately available. In love, discipline means this: you attend to the relationship even when the relationship is not currently exciting. You bring your care, your respect, your knowledge and responsibility to bear even on the ordinary days, especially on the ordinary days, because the ordinary days are most of what a life together consists of. The relationship that is only tended on the special occasions will eventually find that the special occasions are the only thing left. He was not saying that love should feel like work. He was saying that love, like any art, requires the willingness to practice the parts that do not feel like inspiration. The pianist who only sits at the keyboard when they feel moved to play is not developing their art. They are enjoying an existing skill level. Development requires the regular, non-spectacular effort. Let your body rest where it is. Nothing needs your effort now. The breath moves on its own. The second component is concentration. Fromm meant by this the capacity to be fully present to one thing, to bring your attention to bear on the other person without the constant interruption of your own thoughts, anxieties, and agendas. He thought this was one of the most difficult capacities to develop in modern life, and he would have thought it even more difficult if he could have seen the world that came after him, the phone in every pocket, the attention perpetually fractured across hundreds of demands. But he was already observing in the 1950s and 1960s a pattern: the person who was never quite present, who sat with you but was also somewhere else, who listened but was also composing their response, who was always partly elsewhere. Concentration requires the practice of being with one thing, of letting everything else wait, of discovering that the world does not collapse in the interval. This is harder than it sounds, but it is learnable. And without it, the other elements of love cannot fully operate. You cannot care for what you are not attending to. You cannot respect what you are not seeing. You cannot know what you are not fully present to. The third component is patience. Not passive waiting, active accompaniment, the willingness to remain present to the other person's becoming, without requiring it to happen on a schedule. Fromm believed patience was in very short supply in modern life, precisely because modern life was organized around efficiency and results. The person who is impatient with their partner's pace of change, who needs the other person to grow faster, to resolve their difficulties more quickly, to become more of what the impatient partner needs, is not practicing love. They are trying to manage the other person's development for their own comfort. Patient love says, "I am here while you work this out, not because I need you to hurry, but because I am genuinely interested in where you are going and willing to accompany you on the way." Chapter 27, Discipline and Its Mornings. He had a practical suggestion that his readers found unexpectedly mundane: rise at the same time every day. Fromm was serious about this. He believed that the practice of love, like the practice of any art, required a structured life. Not a rigid one, but one in which certain things happened regularly enough to become habit. The morning was particularly important to him because it is the moment when you discover whether you have actually committed to something or merely intended to. Anyone can intend. Intention is easy. The morning tests whether the intention has become practice. The artist who rises at the same time every day and sits at the work, whether they feel inspired or not, is developing something that the artist who waits for inspiration cannot develop: the capacity to produce regardless of state. The musician who practices scales every morning is developing something the musician who only plays when moved cannot develop: the technical resource that makes genuine expression possible. The same is true of love. The person who tends their relationship only when they feel loving, only when the warmth is present, only when the connection feels electric and effortless, is not building love. They are riding what they already have until it runs out. Building love requires the practice on the mornings when you do not feel it. The room does not answer. Breathe. What does that practice look like on an ordinary morning? It looks like attention. It looks like asking a genuine question and listening to the answer without composing your response while the other person is still speaking. It looks like noticing something about them that you had not noticed yesterday. It looks like the very small acts of recognition, acknowledgement, interest, the indication that you see them as a specific person with a specific interior life, and not merely as the familiar person who shares your space. These are not dramatic gestures. They are the scales. They are the daily maintenance of something that, if not tended, does not sustain itself. Fromm also believed that the practice of love required a certain practice of solitude. Not the solitude of loneliness, not the deprivation of connection, the solitude of being genuinely with yourself, reading, thinking, attending to your own interior life with the same quality of presence you are trying to bring to the other person. He thought you could not give genuine presence to another if you had not developed the capacity to be genuinely present to yourself. This is the argument he would develop more fully in his writing on concentration. The person who cannot be alone, who needs the constant stimulation of other people, other voices, other demands, has never developed the internal resource that presence requires. They are always pulling toward the other person to fill something rather than offering themselves to them. The discipline is in both directions. Toward the other person, regular, patient, non-spectacular attention. Toward yourself, regular, patient, honest attention. The two practices develop each other. Henry David Thoreau, who built a small cabin at Walden Pond for $28.12.5 and lived alone there for 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days, beginning in July of 1845, was practicing something he called deliberate living, the willingness to sit with one's own experience without the constant noise that modern life provides as escape. "I went to the woods," he wrote, "because I wished to live deliberately." Fromm would say, you cannot love deliberately in the full practice sense without first learning to live deliberately. Chapter 28. Concentration and the Quiet Room. Fromm believed that the practice of concentration was becoming one of the rarest human capacities, and that its loss was directly connected to the deterioration of love. He meant concentration in a specific sense, the ability to be entirely present to one thing, one person, one moment, without the mind constantly moving toward the next thing, the next concern, the next demand. Not the absence of thought, the quieting of the restless movement of thought. The still point from which genuine attention becomes possible. He thought most modern people had almost no experience of this state, not because they were incapable of it, but because they had never practiced it, and because everything in their environment actively discouraged it. Modern life, by which he meant the mid-century American life, he observed, and which has only intensified in the decades since, was organized around distraction, around the constant provision of stimulation, around the implicit message that to be present to one thing and only one thing for any sustained period was to be missing something. The person who has not developed the capacity for concentration cannot give genuine attention to another human being. They can give partial attention, which is a very different thing. Partial attention says, I am here, but I am also partly elsewhere, and what you receive from me is always filtered through the elsewhere that I am simultaneously occupying. If your mind has been wandering, that is fine. Come back now. We are near the quiet part. He gave a specific practice, one of the few places in the art of loving where he moved from analysis to instruction. Learn to be alone with yourself, not to entertain yourself, not to improve yourself, just to be with yourself, with the thoughts and feelings that arise, without immediately moving to manage or escape them. Sit with them, watch them. This was connected to a much older tradition of contemplative practice, one that Fromm with his background in the mystical strands of both Jewish and Christian thought, was very familiar with. Meister Eckhart, the 14th century German mystic, had written about the necessity of inner stillness, the stilled, receptive mind, as the precondition of genuine encounter with anything beyond the self. Fromm translated this into secular and psychological terms. The stilled mind is the precondition of genuine encounter with another person. Not because you need to be enlightened to love, but because genuine contact requires genuine presence. And genuine presence requires the quiet that most people never quite reach. The practice is simple. Sit quietly. Do not fill the time. Notice what arises. Let it arise. Let it pass. Return to the quiet. This is difficult. It is also, over time, the practice that makes everything else in Fromm's program possible. Because the person who can be genuinely present to themselves can be genuinely present to another. The person who can sit with their own fear without immediately fleeing it can sit with another person's fear without immediately trying to fix it. The person who has developed the capacity for inner stillness can offer something that the restless, distracted person cannot. Real presence. Not performance of presence. The actual thing. This is what Simone Weil meant when she wrote that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. The giving of full, quiet, undistracted presence to another person is rarer than almost any material gift, and it costs something real. It costs the everywhere else that you have to give up in order to be entirely here. Chapter 29. Patience as a form of love. The third element of the practice Fromm described was patience, and he was careful to distinguish it from resignation. Resignation says, "I have given up on you changing, and I am tolerating you as you are." It is the patience of exhaustion. It carries a quiet resentment, because the resigned person had expectations and watched them fail, and the watchfulness of that failure never quite ends. True patience is not about tolerating a gap between what is and what you hoped for. It is about being genuinely interested in the process of becoming, in the other person's current work of growing into who they are becoming, without requiring that process to conform to your schedule. Fromm had a particular way of describing this. He said that love, in the fullest sense, involves a kind of faith, not religious faith in the strict sense, the faith that the other person is capable of growth, the faith that the difficulty you are currently witnessing is part of a process that leads somewhere, the faith that the person in front of you is not finished, not fixed in their current configuration, not identical to the worst version of themselves you have seen. This is genuinely difficult to practice when you are tired, when you have witnessed the same difficulty many times, when the growth seems very slow and the cost of staying present to it seems very high. And here is what Fromm said about that difficulty. It is where love is actually practiced, not in the easy moments, in the moments when patience costs something and you choose it anyway. Let the darkness hold you. Let your breath be slow. He connected this to the concept of faith that ran through the Hebrew prophets he had read in his youth. not the faith of the certain believer, the faith that requires nothing of you because the outcome is already guaranteed. The faith of the waiting presence, the faith that acts as if the good thing is coming without the certainty that it will. This is the most difficult kind of faith, and also, Fromm thought, the most humanly essential. Applied to love, this faith looks like continuing to see the person beyond their current difficulty, continuing to attend to who they are working to be rather than only who they have been, continuing to offer your presence even when the offering is not met with the immediate return you might have hoped for. He was not describing martyrdom. He was describing something much more ordinary. The simple act of staying present to someone's process without requiring them to hurry up and complete it for your convenience. And the paradox Fromm named, this kind of patient presence is, more often than any other single thing, what actually enables the growth it is waiting for. The person who is patiently attended to, who is given the genuine faith of another person's continued interest in their becoming, tends to become, not always and not on any guaranteed schedule, but far more reliably than the person who is pressured or abandoned. The patience is not passive. It is one of the most active things a person can do for someone they love. Chapter 30, Supreme Concern. If your mind has been wandering, come back gently. We are close now to where this leads. The fourth element of the practice Fromm described, he called supreme concern. It is the most difficult to describe and the most essential. He meant by it something like this. The person who practices love as an art has made love. The practice of genuine attention, care, and connection. The organizing principle of their inner life. Not obsessively, not in a way that crowds out everything else, but in the sense that a master craftsman has made their craft central. Every other thing in their life is, to some extent, oriented around it, shaped by it, returned to it. This is what distinguishes the person who loves well from the person who loves adequately. The person who loves adequately tends to the relationship when they think of it, when they have time, when the feeling is present. The person who has made love a supreme concern tends to it as a matter of orientation, the way a compass always returns to north. He was careful to say that this does not mean the person thinks about their partner constantly. He meant something more structural. The habits of attention, the quality of presence, the willingness to be interrupted, these are maintained not by effort but by the person's fundamental orientation. Love, at this level, is not something they do. It is something they are. He had seen this in a small number of his patients over the years. People who had genuinely developed the productive character, who had built the practice through years of disciplined effort and honest reflection, and who now inhabited it naturally. What was remarkable about them was not that they were effortful, it was that they were effortless in a way that was the product of enormous effort. The scales had become music. The body already knew this, the stillness that comes when something is deeply learned, from connected supreme concern to what he called the love of life, biophilia. The biophilic person is drawn to life in all its forms, to growth, to the organic, to the complex, to the process of becoming. They are interested. genuinely interested in plants, in animals, in people, in ideas, in everything that is alive and developing. This is the opposite of what he called the necrophilic orientation, the attraction to the mechanical, to control, to the finished and the fixed. The necrophilic person is made anxious by growth and change, by the unpredictable aliveness of living things. They prefer the dead thing to the living thing, because the dead thing can be arranged. The supreme concern of the fully practicing lover is for life, not abstractly, but in the very concrete sense of the life of the particular person in front of them, their growth, their becoming, the ways they are changing that cannot be predicted. This interest is not possessive, it is the opposite. The more genuinely interested you are in another person's becoming, the less you need to control the direction of that becoming. This is the final form of respect as Fromm understood it, and it is perhaps the deepest form of love, the willingness to be surprised. Chapter 31, New York, 1941. Fromm sat in Manhattan and watched a city full of free people who were terrified of their freedom. He had been watching since 1934 when he arrived. 7 years of observation had given him something he could not have arrived at from theory alone, the evidence of what actually happens to human beings when the old structures collapse and nothing adequate replaces them. What he saw was not what the dominant culture wanted to believe about itself. The dominant American narrative of freedom was triumphant. Free people, free markets, free expression. The pursuit of happiness guaranteed by documents and enshrined in the national self-image. Freedom as a condition to be celebrated. What Fromm observed in his consulting room and in the streets and in the culture around him was something more complicated. Freedom as a burden that most people were quietly escaping. Not through explicit submission to a dictator, not the fascist escape, which at least had the clarity of visible authoritarianism. Through the subtler and more durable routes he had described, conformity, compulsive consumption, the relentless busyness that left no time for the kind of silence in which a person might have to encounter themselves. The city was working very hard. The city was also, Fromm thought, working very hard at not being present to itself. He watched the advertisements. He watched the emerging culture of consumption, the belief that having was the same as being, that acquiring was the same as building, that the right product would supply what the internal work had not been done to develop. He watched people buy things they did not need with time they did not have to impress people they did not particularly like. Let your breath move slowly. You are nowhere else but here. He watched the relationships. He watched people marry on the basis of the falling sensation, and then, when the falling sensation passed, find themselves in the company of someone they had not actually gotten to know yet, because the knowing had not been the point, the feeling had been the point. He watched the subsequent disappointment, the subsequent search for the next falling sensation, the subsequent repetition. He was not judging, he was diagnosing. And the diagnosis, when it came in Escape from Freedom, was this: the modern Western person has achieved a freedom from that is historically unprecedented. Freedom from feudal obligation, from religious compulsion, from explicit external authority, and has not yet developed the freedom, too, that must accompany it. The freedom to think independently, the freedom to feel genuinely, the freedom to love without the anxious accounting of the marketplace. He stayed in New York for many years, and then in Mexico, and he kept watching and thinking and writing. The Art of Loving came 15 years after Escape from Freedom. It was, in a sense, the answer to the question the earlier book had asked. Given that most people have not developed the capacity to bear genuine freedom, given that they have been escaping it through all the available routes, what would it look like to stop? What would it look like to stay? It would look, Fromm said, like love, properly practiced. Chapter 32. The Loneliness Named at Last. Remember the loneliness that arrives when life is fullest? We are here. Fromm called it the deepest existential need of human beings, the need to overcome separateness. And he said that the particular loneliness of the modern person, the loneliness that is not answered by more company, more activity, more reassurance, came from a very specific source: the absence of genuine union. Union, in Fromm's sense, is not merger. It is the encounter of two distinct selves in which something genuinely passes between them. Something is shared that cannot be shared in any other way. Not information, not performance. The actual experience of being with another person who sees you and whom you see. This is what most people are seeking when they say they want to be loved. Not affection, exactly, though affection is part of it. Not sex, exactly, though that is part of it. The thing they are seeking is being genuinely known, being present to someone who is genuinely present to them. The experience of not being alone inside the glass of their own consciousness. Fromm had watched people pursue this through every available route. Through romance, the dissolution of the boundary, the merging of two selves. Through conformity, the elimination of the self that might be alone by merging it into the group. Through what he called the orgiastic unity, the temporary dissolution of individual consciousness through alcohol, drugs, intense experience, the crowd. All of these produce a temporary solution. None of them produces the lasting union he was describing. The lamp is still on. The room is still. You can rest here. The lasting union requires both people to be present, genuinely, distinctly, independently present, and to choose each other from that presence, not to escape themselves in each other, to bring themselves to each other. This is why the development of a genuine self, the rejection of the conformist escape, the willingness to bear the anxiety of genuine individuality, is not opposed to love, it is its prerequisite. You cannot give what you do not have. The self that has not been inhabited cannot be brought to another. And so the loneliness that most people carry, the loneliness that is not answered by more company, that visits even in loving relationships, that arrives most sharply when the external stimulation stops, is not a sign that they are unlovable. It is a sign that the kind of contact they are seeking cannot be achieved by any amount of external provision. The contact they are seeking is the contact that comes from within, from the development of the self that can be genuinely present, from the practice of the love that does not need anything from the other person in order to function, from the patient, disciplined, concentrated attention that over time produces the thing that the falling sensation cannot. Genuine knowledge of another person's inner life. This is what Fromm meant by love as the answer to the problem of human existence. Not a solution to loneliness in the sense of eliminating it. A practice that transforms loneliness, that turns the isolation of individual consciousness into the connection of genuine encounter. Love is the only sane and satisfactory answer to the problem of human existence, he wrote in The Art of Loving. He was not being sentimental, he was being precise. He meant, in a world where genuine freedom requires genuine aloneness, and genuine aloneness produces genuine loneliness, the only practice that can hold both, that can allow a person to be genuinely themselves and genuinely connected at the same time, is love, as he described it, as an art, as a discipline, as something you build slowly through attention and care and respect and knowledge, until it becomes the ground you stand on. Chapter 33. Biophilia, Toward the Living. In his later work, Fromm moved beyond the psychology of love to something that felt, to him, like the foundation beneath it. He called it biophilia, the love of life, the orientation of a person toward living things, toward growth, toward the organic, toward the developing, the surprising, the alive. He contrasted it with what he called the necrophilic orientation, the attraction to the fixed, the controlled, the mechanical, the dead. Not in the dramatic sense. He was not talking about morbid fascination. He was talking about the person who is made anxious by aliveness, who prefers the predictable to the developing, who finds living things difficult because living things change and cannot be arranged. The biophilic person, in contrast, is pulled toward growth. They are interested in seeds, in ideas, in the conversations that go somewhere unexpected, in the person who surprises them. They are not alarmed by change. They are interested in it. They experience the aliveness of the world, its constant movement, its refusal to be fixed, as a source of pleasure rather than anxiety. He thought this orientation was fundamental, that it preceded any specific practice and shaped everything that came from it. The biophilic person does not have to work as hard at the practice of love because the practice grows naturally from their fundamental orientation. They are already turned toward life. The other person's becoming is interesting to them, not threatening. Something settles here. The breath is slower now. He also thought that biophilia could be developed, that it was not a fixed trait, but a direction that could be cultivated. The practice is something like this. Pay attention to what is alive, not as an exercise, as a habit of genuine interest. Notice the plant. Notice the conversation. Notice the person's face when they are talking about something that matters to them. Notice the small signs of growth in yourself, in others, that are easy to miss when you are not looking for them. This is not sentiment, it is a practice of reorientation. The person who cultivates genuine interest in the living world finds that the interest extends naturally to other people, that the curiosity that begins with plants and ideas and the movement of light through leaves becomes, over time, the curiosity that can genuinely attend to another human being. Fromm believed, and this is perhaps his most hopeful conviction, that the biophilic orientation was the natural state of the human being who has not been too severely damaged by the conditions of their development. Children are biophilic by nature. They are interested in everything. The interest contracts over years as the social character installs its requirements, as the marketing orientation begins to shape what is worth attending to and what is not. The practice of love, in this view, is also the practice of recovering the fundamental orientation that was present before the social character took over. Not the innocence of the child, that cannot be recovered and should not be sought, but the interest, the willingness to be surprised, the fundamental conviction that the living world is worth attending to. Chapter 34, The Courage It Takes. Fromm spent decades trying to explain why the most capable people are often worst at the one thing they want most. The answer, when he arrived at it fully, was quieter than expected. It is not that capable people lack feeling. Often they feel more, not less, more acutely, more privately, with a higher internal resolution. It is not that they lack intelligence. They have usually thought about love more than most people. What capable people often lack is not feeling and not thought. It is courage, the specific courage that love requires, the courage to be known. Not the courage of the adventure, of the risk-taking, the bold move, the visible sacrifice, the other kind. The courage of staying present when being present means being seen in your actual condition, uncertain, afraid, smaller than your best self, inconsistent, sometimes petty, sometimes unexpectedly large. The courage of allowing another person to see not just what you are when you are at your best, but what you are when you are not. This is far harder than it sounds. The capable person has usually built their sense of themselves around competence. They have learned through long practice to manage the presentation. They know how to seem calm when they are not, how to perform confidence when they feel it wavering, how to remain impressive, and they have learned this because it has worked. The competence has been rewarded. But love does not reward competence in the same way. Love rewards presence. And the most competent performers are often the least practiced at presence, at the vulnerability of being exactly where they are, without the buffer of performance. Let your jaw soften. Let your shoulders drop. Everything is still. This was the second open loop we left at the beginning of the night. The capable people who are worst at what they want most. The answer is not a failure of love. It is a failure of courage. And courage, like love itself, is a practice. The practice of courage in love looks like this: the willingness to say what is actually true, even when the true thing is not impressive. The willingness to express a need, even when expressing a need feels like weakness. The willingness to be in the presence of another person without the protection of any performance, to simply be there as you are and to allow them to see it. This is the most difficult thing Fromm asked of people. It was also, he thought, the most transforming. Because the moment of genuine vulnerability, of being truly seen and finding that the world does not end, that the other person does not leave, that the love is not withdrawn, is the moment when the practice of love and the practice of self-love come together. You discover in that moment that you are lovable, not in spite of what you are, but as what you are. This is what Carl Rogers meant when he wrote that the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. The self-acceptance is not the end point. It is the gate through which everything further becomes possible. Chapter 35, What Returns to You? The practice lover receives something the romantic chaser never quite does. Not more love, though often more love as well. Something more fundamental, a particular quality of knowing that comes only from sustained, attentive, courageous engagement with another person over time. The person you have loved for 10 years, if you have been genuinely paying attention for those 10 years, is not less mysterious to you. They are more. You have learned enough of their interior life to understand how much more there is. You have seen them in conditions they could not have prepared for, at moments they did not choose to be revealed. You have seen them afraid and petty and generous beyond what you expected, and smaller than their usual self, and larger you have seen them becoming, and they have seen the same in you. This is what union means in Fromm's sense. Not the merger of two people into one, the meeting of two distinct people who have allowed each other genuine access to their interior lives. The mutual knowing that grows not from the initial disclosure of secrets, but from the sustained willingness to be present to each other through all the ordinary and extraordinary seasons of a life. This is what returns to you. Not just knowledge of the other person, though that and it is precious. Knowledge of yourself. The practiced lover knows themselves more clearly than the person who has never allowed genuine contact. Because genuine contact with another person reflects you back to yourself in ways that solitary self-examination cannot produce. You see yourself through eyes that are genuinely separate from yours, and what you see is more than you could have assembled alone. Let your body be heavy where it rests. The night is full, the room is quiet. Fromm's final argument in The Art of Loving was this: love is not the answer to the question, will I be happy? Love is the practice through which you become the person who is capable of happiness. Not because happiness comes from love, exactly. Because happiness, in any durable sense, requires the same things that love requires. The genuine inhabitation of your own existence, the genuine connection with something beyond yourself, the patience and attention and courage that turn ordinary experience into something worth having. The person who has built these things through the practice of love, through the discipline and the concentration and the patient faith, has something the person who has not built them lacks. A self that is genuinely present in its own life. A self that can attend, can care, can know, can respect. A self that has been met by another self and survived the meeting intact. This is the thing that returns. Not a reward, a residue. The trace of all those mornings of practice, all those moments of genuine presence, all those decisions to see the other person clearly and stay. It becomes, over time, who you are. Chapter 36. The Room That Holds You Now. Frankfurt, 1934. A man packs a single case and walks out of the country he was born into. He does not know what he is leaving for, only what he is leaving. He does not know that he will spend the next 50 years asking the one question he could not stop asking, the one that followed him across an ocean and through 2 languages, and into a room in Manhattan, and then a garden in Cuernavaca, where he sat in the evenings and watched the light change. He does not know any of this. He only knows the case, and the door, and the city going quiet behind him. You have been with him a long time tonight. Let your body grow heavy now. Let the breath slow to whatever pace it wants. There is nothing left to follow, nothing left to hold. The man who asked the question, what does it mean to love, and why do most of us miss it, was also the man who understood from personal experience what it means to lose everything familiar and be required to build again from the ground up. He was not writing from a position of comfortable certainty. He was writing from the position of someone who had been required to find out what was essential and what was not. What he found was this: the essential things were very few, and they were all, in the end, about attention. The willingness to see, to be seen, to remain present to another person's becoming without requiring it to conform to your needs. To practice every morning the art that most people defer until they feel ready and discover they never quite feel ready. He wrote in the last pages of The Art of Loving, paradoxically, the ability to be alone is the condition for the ability to love. The room you are in is quiet. The people you love are somewhere in the world. The years you have already lived have already taught you more than you know. What you practiced for years in the name of love may have been the fear of its absence. But the practice is available. It was always available. It requires not more feeling, but more attention, not more desire, but more courage, not a better partner, but a deeper capacity. And the capacity is built the way all capacities are built, through the willingness to show up again and again for the practice. Erich Fromm died in 1980 in Muralto, Switzerland, 5 days before his 80th birthday. He had spent his life asking the one question, and in the asking had helped a very large number of people see their own lives more clearly. Not perfectly, clearly enough to begin. You do not need to do anything with what you have heard tonight. Let it settle where it lands. Some of it will be there in the morning. changed slightly by sleep into something more useful than it was. The case is packed, the door is open, the city is quiet. Everything you are is enough to begin. Sleep now.